that working? Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the People and Health Overview Committee on Thursday, the 14th of September. Before we start, I'll just get the councillors present to just introduce themselves, and we'll just go from one side of the chamber to the other. So starting with Councillor James.
Stella Jones, Dorchester East.
Good morning.
Howard Legg, up Wayne Broadway in Weymouth.
Good morning, Chairman. Councillor Ryan Holloway, Wareham Ward.
Yes, I'll go, Chairman. Jean Dunseith, Chickerell.
Tony Alford, I represent Egerton Ward.
Rebecca Knox, representing Beaminster Ward.
Cathy Lugg, representing Ferndown North.
And I'm Mike Parks. I'm also Ferndown North and chair of the committee. Okay, we'll move on to item 1, which is apologies.
Good morning. We have apologies from Councillor Pauline Batstone.
Thank you. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any matters they wish to declare? No. Okay. If anything crops up as we go along, please let us know. Item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of June. They've all been circulated. Has anyone got any comments? If not, could I have a proposer that we accept those? Councillor Holloway, thank you. And a seconder, Councillor Ezard. All those in favour? Thank you. Item 4 is public participation. There are no questions from members of the public. And item 5, which is questions from members, there are no questions from members. There are item 6, there are no urgent items, which brings us on to item 7, which is our work plan, our work programme and forward plan, which you had. Are there any comments on that? Okay. There are a few items that have been added to that, so we'll just keep reviewing that as we go along. Okay, we move to item 8, which is the Ofsted regulation supported accommodation for 16 to 17-year-olds.
Good morning. I'm Claire Shields. I'm the Corporate Director for Commission and Partnerships in Children's Services, and I'm going to run you through a very quick presentation just to give you an overview of what's in the paper, and then happy to take questions at the end. And I have a colleague with me, which is Kelly Henry, who is our Head of Placement Commissioning and can also take questions as well, just in terms of the detail. And Kelly's been very ably leading this piece of work. So I'll just take you through a very quick overview. So supported accommodation is a type of accommodation and semi-independent living for 16 and 17-year-olds who are ready to live with more independence and don't need significant levels of care. So it's different to the type of care that's provided through fostering and through kinship arrangements or in a residential children's home. So it's for those 16 and 17-year-olds that are ready to move on a little bit more towards independence. We can offer it to children in care. We can also offer it to those who have left care that are still 16 and 17, and those who are 16 and 17 years old and present as homeless to the council and don't need to come into our care. And in those circumstances, we do a joint assessment with housing colleagues around if this is the right place for those young people. And the purpose of supported accommodation is really to support young people to develop independence into adult life and keeping them safe, but in a homely and nurturing environment before they're ready to just go out into the world on their own in their own independent accommodation. So the plans for that is that it really needs to offer stability and consistency in some relationships for our young people, help young people access local services like access to education, access to healthcare, but also about developing relationships with the local community. So why has there been a bit of a policy change? So until now, this type of accommodation has not been regulated by Ofsted. So there's been no regulations and anyone can provide that type of accommodation. And we would quality assure that as individual local authorities and had good arrangements in place to do that. But this new policy is about having some national oversight on that provision. And the reasons for that really are twofold. One was around quality, so real concerns around a lack of national guidelines or a lack of standards around that meant that we couldn't really understand what the impact of the provision would be or what the quality looked like. And so there was real variation across the country, both in terms of the quality of the actual physical buildings and the accommodation offered, but also in terms of the quality of support that was being offered to young people across the country. And the second area of big concern is around suitability. And nationally, the government could see that there were growing numbers of children in care being placed in this type of provision. And we had some questions about whether or not they were ready for it, whether or not they would be better off staying for longer in foster care and residential children's homes. And there was also some growing concerns nationally that there were children under 16 being placed in this type of provision as well. So real concerns about usage of it and making sure that we were doing that well. And that wasn't the situation for us in Dorset. We were always really careful about that, but nationally that was definitely an issue that was going ahead. And the sort of second area of concern around suitability is we were seeing a creep and a growing in the use of this type of provision for young people with really complex needs because we couldn't find placements for them anywhere else. And they were being placed here because there was a lack of any alternative and not good guidance around that. So you'll see in the paper some background information around deprivation of liberty orders and how we support people through that. But we need to be really clear that when young people are placed in this type of provision, they're getting the right support and it's the right quality for them. So those quality and suitability have been some of the main reasons for policy change. What the government are seeking to achieve through this national policy, and which would be really supportive of, is that no children under 16 are placed in an unregistered setting, and that has become unlawful. So it is not it's unlawful for a Director of Children's Services to authorise that type of placement, but it's also unlawful for providers to offer this type of provision to under 16s. So that's been really clarified through this process. Also making sure that children who require levels of care do so in appropriate registered setting. So they need to be in a children's home, they need to be in a foster placement, or they need to be in kinship care arrangements and not in supported accommodation. So really clarifying the position around that. And we're expecting to see through this regulation improved quality experiences and outcomes for young people that are placed in this provision. Much greater clarity on the type of support that's going to be offered through this type of provision. So we can be really clear when children and young people are there, we know what that looks like and we know what they're going to be received. And much more requirement around leadership and management, so having appropriately qualified people running this type of provision and providing the right leadership and management to the people that work there as well. So our approach to supported accommodation in Dorset, we do not place children under 16 in provision that's not registered with Ofsted. And primarily, we will support our children in care to remain in foster care or residential children's home until their 18th birthday and beyond through some programmes called Stay and Put, which is an arrangement where we can support foster carers to care beyond 18th birthday. And Staying Close is where we can support residential children's homes to stay alongside young people as they move towards independence. And that is our preferred option. However, we will consider supported accommodation for our children in care when it supports their path to independence, and we think that's the right thing to do. It will always follow a care plan review. It must be approved by a service manager and is overseen and ratified by their quality assurance reviewing officer. And you might hear us sometimes talking about those as independent reviewing officers or IROs. And when that happens, we will put in place enhanced visiting requirements and senior manager oversight and visits to supported accommodation providers. So as a senior leadership team, we go and visit, we go and see what it looks like, and we make sure that we're confident around that. So that's really important and part of our policy work and how we do that in Dorset. So New requirements. All supported accommodation providers must register with Ofsted by the 28th of October. And then inspection by Ofsted will commence in April 2024. And in doing that registration, Ofsted will be coming back to us and to providers to say, you've met the standards, you haven't met the standards, we approve you, we don't approve you. So really important that that's in good time, and we've been tracking that. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. To be able to register, there's 4 different types of supported accommodation, and so providers have to identify which type of supported accommodation they're delivering, and they have to register each one of those separately. And there'll be a separate registration for the different types. They must have a registered manager with the required skill and experience to manage the provision. They have to write a statement of purpose which sets out the type of support that's there, and then set out how the new 4 standards will be met. And in effect, that is, how are they going to keep children safe, the protection standard, the quality of the accommodation standard, the support standards, so setting out really clearly how that will be delivered and making sure that they can meet a leadership and management standard. So, where are we now? We have some in-house services that we're required to register. So we have a supported lodging service where we support children and young people through that. That has to be registered by the council. And for us, that sits within our current fostering service. And a registered manager has been identified. So that is the registered manager for the fostering service. We've got all the policies and procedures in place to enable us to implement this. And we've submitted the first stage of the registration documents, and we're waiting to move forward to the next stage. But we're also required to make sure that anybody that we commission is also moving through that registration process. So we've made sure all providers are aware and they have acknowledged the requirement to register. We've got weekly oversight in place and meetings with providers in August to make sure they were on track. So we haven't identified any current providers that we're worried they're not going to be able to meet those requirements or that they won't be able to register. And that's really important, because if they're not making the right moves towards registration, we would have a requirement to remove children, and we would need to do that in a timely way. So the other thing that we're doing is every time we're placing new young people in supported accommodation, we check that their registration status is up to date and making sure that they're absolutely going to be able to register as we go forward. And then just a little bit of overview of financial implications. This is a new requirement both for us and for providers. So in recognition, the Department for Education has provided a one-off grant to help support some of those setups. So some direct costs really laid out for you around our in-house provision, but indirect costs for us around oversight and quality assurance, new processes we've had to put in place, and preparation for another Ofsted inspection. So this part of our provision will also be subject to Ofsted inspection. And then external provision, we're mindful of, and we're tracking this really closely. There is a potential, as you bring in new regulation, that there will be increased cost to those providers that we commission, and that cost will be passed on through placement costs. So we're monitoring that, and we will use some of that grant to offset some of those challenges. And so finally, recommendations really ask for comment on our approach to the implementation of this national policy, and a recommendation to Cabinet that we adopt this approach and move forward so that we can comply with all the latest legislation and any subsequent regulation as it comes forward. Thanks. Happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. It's a very comprehensive run through, so appreciated. Take comments. I'll take Councillor Holloway first.
Thank you, Chairman. No, very pleased to receive this report, Claire. No, I think it's very welcoming. I certainly would support it. Just one quick question, really just regarding about the finance. It says that obviously we have been awarded the grant. It says it's been paid in 4 instalments, and we have received the first one in April. What was the value of that first lot, and do we actually have a timetable for when the other 3 payments will arrive? Because I'm just obviously just a little concerned that personally I would rather that the DFE would just give us the whole package rather than in dribs and drabs. Thank you.
So the total grant that's been awarded is just 330,000, just over, and it's in 4 instalments of the same value. So just over 80,000 will have been received. I'm trying to do the maths in my head because I hadn't got it right in front of me. We have to return some management information returns just to show that we're in line with the grant conditions and that they're confident in us. But they have announced the whole amount of the money. It will be coming through as subject to us following the grant conditions. So I'm not concerned that we won't have that money through. We will get it. It's just about managing the payment cycle.
Thank you. Councillor Legg.
Thank you. Yes, I'm pleased to see this report as well. It's great. I have a couple of concerns, mostly about standards and inspection, which is paragraph 4, something or other, I think it is. 4. Initially, there are no standards which these places are being inspected to. And this brings up a bit of concern. Even when they're starting off, I would have thought they could have set some minimum standards of KPIs, which are quite elementary in my view. And I'm a bit concerned about that for consistency, because that really could encourage a postcode lottery, and I don't like seeing that. And the similar sort of thing that applies is, of course, that quite a few of these managers cover more than one local authority. So how are you going to, I mean, they might own several properties is what I'm getting, and they run it as a business. Obviously, if they only got one property, they can only be in one local authority. But there are companies or organisations that do this. And I'm just wondering how you're going to make sure that there's compatibility, if you like, when the same manager covers 2 or more local authorities.
Hi, if I could just answer the bit around the providers who work across different local authorities. I think that was your question around how we can manage and oversee that. So Ofsted, as part of their introduction, will be informing us as local authorities of all providers and where they are based. So we will have that bird's eye view of that. We've also got some regional arrangements. So we've got good relationships with colleagues in BCP. We've got the Southwest Practice Group, where as local authorities we can come together and share intelligence and concerns or areas of good practice that we want to share with other providers in terms of what we're doing. We've got, in terms of how we've managed this as a start, we've got a really comprehensive framework around how we were managing support accommodation before Ofsted came in. So I think, and they have noted, in terms of the range of accommodation support our young people have received is to a high standard. But I think it's a very valid point that it could be a postcode lottery. But I think as we progress through the inspections, which will start next year, and the evidence we will gather, that will become a lot more standardised across the country. I hope that's answered your question. But please, yes.
Concern as I do.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ezard.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I welcome this, and obviously Ofsted have obviously missed this out in the past, and it is an approach that actually is something that Dorset obviously has been looking at for a long time. At 2.1, you say in Dorset we seek to support children in care to remain in foster care and residential children's home till they're 18. And so will they come under the scheme of staying put and this staying close arrangements? So will they have to get registered? And also, will the young people have a voice when Ofsted go round? Because that isn't really mentioned. So they will, whatever they think about the accommodation will be taken into account. The other thing, and the other thing, I think it's 4.1, why would you inspect the head office of a business instead of the placement where the child is? I mean, that seems odd to me. So could you answer those, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Ezard. I think just around our children remaining in foster care and staying put arrangements and children around staying close, there isn't a regulatory framework for that specifically. However, we do monitor those really, really closely because we put them into place. So we provide the oversight as a local authority and make sure that they're delivering the standards and everything that we want, and constantly review those packages of care. And we've got good oversight both from our personal advisors that stay alongside our children and young people and see what's happening, as well as our contracts team and other things. So there's good oversight of those arrangements, although they're not regulated. It's slightly different from this. In terms of the supported accommodation inspection regime, absolutely part of the standard is to talk to children and young people that are in that place. But you recognise some of the challenges. If they're only going to head office and not actually going to be visiting the premises, that is a challenge. So they're not going to be able to get that view. For us, it'd be really important that we make sure we see all of those places and go to all of those places. And we also have a programme of young commissioners who come alongside us who can go out and check. And we'll be working alongside to make sure that we're absolutely seeing what that looks like and what that feels like, and hearing directly from children and young people. The Ofsted framework is still being consulted on. They haven't quite tied it up, so they may find after the end of this consultation they make some changes to what that looks like. But as it stands, that's what they're planning to do. But it is a bit of a challenge, actually, if they're not going to be visiting those premises, to be able to see the look and feel of all of them when they're doing the inspections. So it's a bit of work for us to do collectively, I think, as a system as well.
Thank you for that. Yes, a bit worrying if there's not completely joined up thinking on that, and I hope that will be it. And if you've got the young people doing commissions or whatever, I hope they report back, and that's a regular thing, and they've got some criteria to, go by. The other thing that I wanted is this for all able-bodied and not people that are needs that have needs. Is it just for the able-bodied? Can we clear that up, or is it with people that need supported, help and care?
So there is supported accommodation that is around the provision of personal care and other things. This is slightly different in the world of adult services, but supported accommodations for any young people, we would need to be really confident that they have the right support to be able to meet the needs, and that the young people were ready for independence, and that the support was right and we would match. But it's not specifically around personal care, this type of supported accommodation. I know there's supported accommodation in adults for people with disabilities and all the things. This is slightly different. But we would absolutely offer it to the right young people with the right needs, and whatever that support framework looks like coming around. And just sort of on your last point in terms of what that looked like in terms of assurance, we'll take some reports through the corporate parenting board about what young people are telling us, what it looks like and what that feels like as well, so that we've got some greater oversight here too.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Yeah. Yesterday, I happened to visit a supported children's home in Dorchester, and it was a wonderful place for young people who've had problems in the past to start learning how to be independent, continue with their education, and start thinking about their future. And but occasionally, some youngsters just do not fit into these places because they can't adapt to rules and regulations. I just wondered how we follow the progress of these people when they're over 18. And also we have quite a lot, and I think a lot more, youngsters who will become homeless because they just got nowhere to go. They're sofa surfing. And how do we follow these youngsters? And then I've got another question after
that. In terms of our young people who, when we make a decision for them to be placed in such accommodation and they're struggling for whatever reason, we have got social workers and then personal advisors post-18 who will step into that space and try and stabilise the situation for the young person and try and look at what maybe the issues, concerns are there. One of the good things about our providers is they'll step up in with us and support like a multi-agency plan around how we can support that young person to maintain that tenancy for them, so they've got that stability as well.
I'm glad we don't give up on any of these young people. That's the important thing. And can I just ask, in paragraph 1.4, you talk about children subject to deprivation of liberty. Do we have any of those in Dorset, and where are they dealt with, in county or out of county?
Yes, We do, and we have quite a strong system around supporting children and young people with deprivation of liberty orders, which is quite often about how we keep them safe and keep them well. It does have to go through a court process, so it is signed off by a judge. They're reviewed really, really regularly around what that looks like, and it's really important that we get the right type of provision and supported accommodation. Might not necessarily be right for young people around that. It's a different type of care and support offer as we move through. So yes, we do, in the right circumstances and with significant oversight, both from the courts and from our in-house teams as well around that.
Thank you. Councillor Lugg.
Yeah, just a practical question. The registration fee, 5,000 and something, is that a one-off or is there an ongoing cost?
The registration fee is a one-off cost, and then there'll be separate fees going forward as when we get inspected.
Councillor Dunseith.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 28, it mentions spot purchasing. I wonder if you could explain what that is, please. Thank you.
Of course. In Dorset, we have got a framework of approved providers. So those providers applied to join a framework. They had to make a certain amount of criteria in order to come onto that framework. So it's about price and quality. So that's our framework providers, and that's usually more financially better for us as a local authority. But there are times, for whatever reason, maybe location and so on, that we would have to go to a provider outside of that framework. So that's what we would call a spot purchase. So usually it's only one or two spaces within that provider. So we call that spot, but we apply the same due diligence checks, visits and oversight as we do to our framework providers. I hope that's answered your question.
Thank you. Councillor Knox.
Thank you. This is slightly maybe thinking a bit further ahead, but there might be plans or not. Have Dorset Council in the sort of one public estate box of policy making got in mind to actually start providing the accommodation that we might need for the future needs of our young people over the next, say, 5 years?
Thank you. I think you must have been reading our minds. It was a conversation we were having just this morning before we came in. Absolutely. So two things. We're working on our sufficiency strategy update at the moment, and part of that is about projecting what we need into the future in terms of numbers and places and where all of our young people are. And then the second part of that is having conversations with colleagues in assets and property about what are the opportunities for where we could use either existing provision or existing assets that could be repurposed for some other things, or where we might need to think about new build or other places, and different mechanisms for doing that, about whether or not we'll run them ourselves or whether or not we can invite providers to do that. We're also having some conversations with external providers that might be interested in growing their provision, and what might that look like in terms of our offer to them and how we could support and come alongside them. So yeah, really front and centre of our minds, and thinking through, it would be really helpful to bring forward the sufficiency strategy for this committee to be able to see inside it on and what we're doing as we move forward as well.
Quick follow-up, only that you've got 82 members who drive around Dorset and spot places and opportunities which aren't necessarily Dorset Council assets. So I do hope that the sustainable strategy is being exposed as far as possible to not only local communities, but parish and town councils, of course, but also to others outside of this committee. I'm sure we all have seen places that you think that could be useful for somebody every day that we're in our wards. So that would be really good to have as soon as possible visibility of what we might be spotting for you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Knox. So a really helpful question, and I just wanted to. One of the challenges we face around providing the kind of properties for these young people is it can be very tempting to think about big spaces and thinking, wow, that would be great, that could provide homes for 12 young people, which can be very enticing. But unfortunately, the evidence is pretty overwhelming that it is much better for these young people, much more preferable in terms of having an ordinary experience and managing behaviours to have quite small premises. So we're talking about 2-3 bedded units being the ideal, really. And we all know how precious those are in our housing market as it is. So we're looking to think always about how we can accommodate that, how we can work that round. Kirtleton Avenue being a great example of how we've done that with care leavers. And that is a big premises, but working it in a slightly different way has made it manageable. But we have to think about how we, unsurprisingly, a number of 16 and 17-year-olds who have had challenging lives display some behaviours that can be problematic in neighbourhoods. So we don't want that for our young people or our neighbourhoods. So really thinking about how we manage that. But great offer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alford.
Thank you, Chairman. I have two questions. It starts with question 1, which refers to paragraph 4.1 on page 26. And it says, they will inspect the head office of a provider, not individual settings where young people live. Now, I can understand a logic to that. It says something like, for a young person, it doesn't feel much like home if Ofsted inspectors can turn up at any time unexpectedly. But I do have to ask the question about what a head office will give an inspector in terms of evidence. And I wonder whether what is really going on is an inspection by interview.
Yeah, thank you. And it is a potential risk into the inspection process and one that they're consulting on. So I think the challenge of that and the things that they will be able to get, they'll be able to understand safer recruitment processes and other things. What they'll miss is seeing what it looks like on the ground and the experience of children and young people and being able to speak to those children and young people. So as I was saying earlier, what we will make sure that we do is have really strong quality assurance around this framework. Ofsted is an additional scrutiny, but it's really important that we have our own scrutiny in place and that we're providing really good oversight. So we will continue visiting all of these premises, the actual places that children and young people are. We will have our young people go and inspect and report back to us, and we will make sure that our operational staff know how to raise any concerns when they're out and about seeing young people as well. So yeah, it is a limitation, I think, of the current inspection framework that they're proposing, and one that we need to make sure that we mitigate, I think.
My second question is on page 28, 7.1, and it uses this expression, purchase the full range of policies and procedures. Now, it is an interesting notion, the thought of buying off the shelf all your policies and procedures. And maybe there is a place for it in other parts of public life, I don't know. If there is some sort of economic benefit from conducting yourself in that way, it's useful to know. And I just wonder, when we start talking about policies and procedures, what is the training requirement that is going to be needed?
I'll come to the policies and procedures about buying that. So Children's Services have a contract with a company called Tri-X, and what Tri-X do is, as soon as there's any new legislation, policy guidance and so on, they will take that and they will interpret it, what that actually means for practitioners on the ground, both our legal responsibilities and practice and good practice. And then what we do is a thing called, we Dorsetize it, and we bring it round and we centre it to how we deliver our services to children. So it's a template that will ensure that we're really clear what our legal responsibilities are, but then we can work around that and enhance them to ensure that we're giving that best offer around whatever that policy or procedure may be and best practice. Forgive me, sorry. Is that training? Oh, training, yes, sorry, apologies. So as part of the reform support accommodation, the government appointed the National Children's Bureau to be their practice guidance. So they're a national charity. So what they've done is they have set up regional groups. So that's both for information sharing and training. We have a comprehensive training offer for our social workers and managers around best practice for children. And within that, supported accommodation would be covered as well through our looked after processes around looked after reviews, education, health, family time and so on. So it's all within that. So whilst there's no specific training, it's very much embedded in our day-to-day children in care training as well.
Thank you. Councillor Azard.
Thank you, Chair. At 6.2, all our supported accommodation providers are aware of acknowledge the upcoming requirement to register. I've got a question. What if some don't want to? How do you handle that? And can they opt out and still provide? I'm just saying, as it goes on, it says 3 providers who only provide accommodation indicated they will not register, and then 2 providers from the framework have already submitted registration. That means 2 of the 3 have already come forward and said they would. Is it quite onerous that this registration or this compliance is quite difficult? And it says and provided evidence. So I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite clear what the criteria is that they need to provide to come up to the Ofsted, standard. So could you just explain that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Azard. We will absolutely not be able to continue to place young people with providers who have not registered with Ofsted. So if we have any providers that haven't made the deadline for their registration, we will have to have conversations about moving children to placements where it will be registered in time to meet the Ofsted requirements. So it's really important. That's why we're tracking it so closely and having those weekly oversight meetings. So just for real clarity, we will not place children in provision that's not registered as we move forward. It will not be the right thing to do, and they will not be able to provide. There are requirements. They have to identify a registered manager. They have to do the work that we're doing around policies and procedures, and they have to make sure that they're going to be able to make those standards to be able to pass those requirements. So yes, they have to do some work. The paragraph there refers to our supported accommodation framework that Kelly was describing earlier is for 16 to 25-year-olds. So we have a number of people on that framework who've said that we're not going to provide accommodation for 16 and 17-year-olds. We're only going to do over 18s. And we're okay with that. We have no 16 and 17-year-olds placed in there, and that works for them and works for us. But any provider that will be providing accommodation to 16 and 17-year-olds absolutely must register, and we will only place with them as and when they have.
Can I just say, really, this paper is just particularly for 16 to 18-year-olds, not for 18 to 25-year-olds, but it's sort of a grey area with that. So, I mean, you keep an eye on that as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dunseith.
Thank you, Chairman. This is another 6.2 question to carry on from Councillor Azard. She's mentioned that the 3 providers are not registering for over 18s. That is outside the scope of this morning's meetings. Do you feel that this new regime with the registering and the Ofsted inspections may have any impact on the provision? Thank you.
Yes, I do. I think there are definitely some providers who would have historically offered placements for 16 and 17-year-olds who will no longer do that because of the requirements. So I think there will be a little bit of a shift as we move forward. And I think what we might see into the future is people specialising in 16 and 17-year-olds and 18 and over, just by nature of the regulation. So we'll watch that closely. We have lots and lots of conversations with the providers, and we have been in the lead up to this about where they sit on that framework, and I think we will start to see some shifts and changes. What I will expect to see is improved quality. I think by introducing some of those standards for 16 and 17-year-olds, we will see a real reduction in the variation in quality, very much move towards standardisation, which I think will be good for children and young people. But I think by nature of the regulations, there will be some providers that won't be able to meet them or won't want to meet them and will exit that bit of the market. And I think that's to be expected.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we've got any more comments or questions. So thank you very much for everyone's input on that, and thank you for the comprehensive answers. We need to recommend this to Cabinet. Could I have a proposer that we recommend this approach to Cabinet? Thank you, Councillor Alford. Seconded by Councillor Knox. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you. We move on to item 9, which is the birth to settled adulthood, and it's the report from the independent chair, who is Mark Rogers, who I believe is online to talk to us. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Chairman, and good morning, members. I hope you can see me and hear me. Certainly hear me anyway, at least. So good morning. Thank you very much for having me back. This is my third report to you as independent chair on this programme. And I think there might be a short presentation that can accompany what I'm going to say, but I'm quite happy just to speak to the report if needs be.
We've got PowerPoint.
Great, thank you very much. First slide is actually a really helpful reminder that this is a partnership programme, so it's between the Council and NHS Dorset. As I say, third report that you're receiving from me, so thank you. Next slide, please. Just wanted to remind members of what I said last time back in March. So at that point, the board and I had complete confidence in the partnership's ambition around this programme, and we were convinced that the work that needed still to be undertaken would be done so in a timely way, and that this programme would complete next March, which is the time frame that was set out at the beginning of the work. So that's where we were in March. I highlighted some key strengths of the programme, which you can see here on the slide. So I'm not going to kind of go through those in any detail. Next slide, please. And then I highlighted a number of risks to the programme, and I'll come back to these shortly in subsequent slides. I think it's just it is worth just focusing on these briefly. The Council and NHS Dorset are both very busy organisations, as you know only too well. So there's always going to be a risk about keeping everybody's attention focused on the work, making sure that there's the right capacity and capabilities to deliver it. And you will have seen just from your previous report, actually, won't you, that the work just continues to flood in, and those who are working on this programme were also working on the previous report. So it's a very busy environment for all of those involved in this work, and I kind of want to emphasise that I'm still impressed with the progress that was made back in March, and that I'll report on in a moment for today. Again, I'm not going to go through the rest of the risks on this slide. I think the one I just wanted to pull out, my recognition of, as chair, that there are people pulling all the stops out and working very hard to make sure that this programme proceeds. Next slide, please. So where are we today? Well, again, tremendous progress has been made since March, and particularly in the most important space, really, which is working across this partnership to redesign the services in a way that will better meet the needs of the children, young people and families that this work is intended to benefit. So there has been significant progress since March. That's not that there wasn't progress up to March, it's just that the foundations were being laid at that point. Since that time, as I say, teams have been working together to pretty intensively, I would say, to make sure that there's a good understanding now coming through of what this new service will look like. I think the second thing I want to focus on is we are seeing continued buy-in from elected members, the lead members and the senior officers, both in the council and in NHS Dorset. It will remain important for them to be able to continue to keep their focus on this work and see it through to its conclusion next March. I'm not saying that that isn't going to happen. I'm just kind of coming back to that point about how much work there is that everybody is doing. And in order for this to complete, everybody will need to keep their focus. Partnership working has been a feature of this programme all the way through. It's been deepening and broadening all the way along. I'm really pleased to see that relationships have been strengthened, collective understanding has developed over time. That will need to continue. I think the one thing that I would stress at this stage around partnership working is that when the service redesign is agreed and put into place next year, it doesn't mean that the programme is over. Actually, the partnership will continue to exist, and those people in it will need to continue to work well together in order to ensure that delivery of better services and better outcomes in the future is actually what occurs. And then finally, on this page at least, come back to the point around communications. So now that there is something starting to emerge that families can see, by which I mean the new service model, it will be really important that the council, the NHS and the Dorset Parent Carer Council work effectively together to ensure that parents understand what's coming online next year, have a say in it as they might still need to along the way to implementation, and are ready for the way the new service is going to operate next April. I think also there's another aspect to this, which is ensuring that the workforce also understands exactly what changes are going to be made and how they'll impact them and the way they're going to need to adapt for the future. So there's an important kind of point at this stage around making sure that communications ramp up, I guess, and that families in particular understand what's coming. Next slide, please. So, these are the key areas in the report that you've received. I'll go through them relatively briefly. I'm sure you'll have questions about them. Further progress has been made since March on mapping how much money is already spent on the children and families we are talking about, and understanding how much resources are required for the future service. That work isn't complete, but it has moved forwards. I think it's fair to say that the NHS in particular has found this work difficult because the way it assembles its budgets is different from the council, and it doesn't have quite the same granular understanding of where every single pound it spends goes. But nonetheless, the work between the council and the NHS is progressing well enough, but it will need to be completed in order that everybody understands how much is presently being spent and how much is going to be spent in the future. That is progress from the last time I reported, when actually this work was underdeveloped, particularly in terms of the NHS contribution. I've already talked about the service redesign, so I don't want to keep going on about that. But there are some very important checkpoints coming up over the next 2 months. So there is a partnership board meeting next Monday, and then there's a further board meeting in October. Sometime between next Monday and October, agreement will need to be reached amongst the partners about the particular options that they want to pursue in this service redesign. So some very critical work coming over the next 4 to 6 weeks. I think it's important to say, and actually, to be fair, council colleagues reminded me about this, and we've included it in this report. All along, there has been a very strong focus on making sure that those young people in the system already, for whom perhaps things weren't working well enough, get a better deal. So it's important for the committee to know that the work that has been called the Improvement and Recovery work stream has continued over the sort of 18-20 months that I've been involved, and particularly that work has been helpful in ensuring that those youngsters get good transition planning into adulthood, but also the learning from what hasn't been good enough for them feeds into this particular programme. You have a case study, it's redacted in terms of public access to it, but there's a case study that members can see that illustrates some of the improvement work that has been done in this space, and I think it's very pleasing to see it. The next point I want to refer to is about commissioning. So this is a new service that's coming into being, and it's a service that brings together functions between different departments of the council and with the NHS. The most senior officers are thinking about and need to continue to think about exactly how they want to commission services in the medium to long term. Those discussions are well underway, but I think in the next few weeks it needs to become clear whether there's going to be a fully integrated joint commissioning function, and alongside that the extent to which therefore budgets are not just aligned but may even be pooled at some point. So what I'm flagging up in this report is those discussions are well underway, but it will be important to the future of this new service that it's well understood how things get commissioned in future, how integrated that's going to be and how integrated the money might be. I've already said about communication, so I'm not going to repeat that. It will be important to shift up a gear. And I've already talked about the importance of senior leaders needing to continue to nurture the partnership conditions, not just for the next few months, but actually to ensure that this new service is a success into the long term. And final slide, I think, is indeed the final slide. So, Chair, that's my presentation for this morning. Obviously, you have a fuller report in front of you as well, and I'm sure others in the chamber will be very happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. Do we have any questions or comments from members? Councillor Dunseith.
Thank you, Chairman. Page 35, 2.2, it mentions funding, and I just wondered what your concerns were about future funding and resources for your new service model, the implications. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So my concerns, I guess, are my concerns. Not necessarily concern, perhaps isn't the correct word. What needs to happen? Let me say kind of what I think it is that needs to happen. So it is clear that there are a range of services presently provided or commissioned by the council and the NHS that benefit these young people who are in scope of the programme. It needs to be completely understood how much money that is. So both the council and the NHS, in other words, have been mapping out how much spending they are presently doing in relation to these young children, young people and families. I said a little earlier, the NHS has found that quite hard. Sometimes because actually it has block contracts, so it can't disaggregate from a block contract exactly what it spent on whom. So my first point is, nonetheless, both the council and the NHS need to get as close as they possibly can to that shared understanding of how much funding is going into the services that the children benefit from now. And then clearly that will help inform both the Integrated Care Board and the council as a whole how much funding needs to be spent on this service into the future. So that's where my focus has been, is just making sure actually we know how much money is going into these services now, and then decisions can be taken about how much can go into them in the future. My concern, I'd have a more general concern, of course, which is just making sure that there's sufficiency of resource for the new service. But I know that that is being considered at the moment, and the service redesign work is actually being costed. So it will become clear both to the council and the NHS how much is required in the longer term.
Thank you. Councillor Lugg.
2.4 says collaborative working needs to be developed further to ensure that the board can be advised of the collaborative model of commissioning. Can you give me some idea how that's going to be developed, please?
I could certainly give you some idea. I wonder actually if either the executive director or commissioning would want to answer that question. They are in the thick of this dialogue at the moment.
I'm very happy to. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Councillor Lugg. So there's been a huge amount of work going on across children's and adults and health together in a time when there's already a significant change, as Mark, I think, has outlined in particular. What's been really powerful around that, I think, is a really shared understanding about the cost of poor transitions. And so what we're really looking at within this development is a true investor save, and the investment is actually by people working closer together in a much more integrated way into that space of life of those 16, 17, 18-year-olds as they move through and continue to have complex needs. We're really pleased to see that our health colleagues understand and truly appreciate the importance of that 0 to 25 concept and are thinking increasingly about mental health and learning disability services moving into that space as well. So our sense is that all of the kind of right things are aligning in the right time and the right space, but it probably isn't always going quite as fast as some of us would like. But we are absolutely all understanding that young people, are often not ready to move move at 18. And there are different parts of our legislation already that are kind of slightly in opposition to each other. You know, we have for SEND the 0 to 25 agenda really clearly. We have for our care leavers the 0 to 25 agenda. And then suddenly our young people come out of CAMS at 16, 17 because there isn't an opportunity for them to stay in that mental health support space beyond that. So that level of collaboration is really important. And then the other element, which we also know will, in the longer term, produce some real opportunities around efficiencies and economy, is around really being able to commission for a whole life plan. Some of our young people we know will need ongoing support way beyond their 18th year. And we can commission for that much more early now that we've been working together to really strengthen that work between adults, children and health.
Do you actually meet in person ever, or is it always online? Because I'm a big believer of actually being in a room and getting to know somebody makes it a lot easier to work with them when there's conflict.
I think if you're ever around the children and adult space, come in for a cup of coffee, and there's always people there to welcome you. We meet in person a lot. It's really important to us, and we're encouraging our staff to do that too. So there is something absolutely right about making sure that practitioners get back to being able to think together and work together. And there's been a huge amount of support from the DPCC in this space as well. So, you know, the Dorset Parent Carer Council, really helpful around the local offer work recently, which is all about great information, and those were in-person sessions. Our families have been really clear. They don't always want to do things online. They don't always want to do things digitally. Sometimes they want a leaflet, and sometimes they want a face-to-face. We listen to that and offer whatever is their requirement, really.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, the board's obviously done some good work. And I just wondered who actually is on the board. Do we have a young person on the board representing the children and young people? Do we have one of the family members from the Dorset Family Group on the board? Because it's so important to have those people right at the beginning before we make any more decisions.
I'll come to that and then
so
Mark,
I think,
oh, go ahead, Mark, sorry.
No, it's fine, Teresa, carry on, please.
Okay, thank you. So we have good representation from the Dorset Parent Carer Council. A number of family members are both involved in the main board and in other activities around that. Our young people have consistently told us, they're not that keen on coming to our meetings. Sorry, guys, they find them terribly exciting. But what we do, and what our Youth Action team do so brilliantly, our Youth Voice team do so brilliantly, is have huge amounts of engagement. And loads of you will have been involved in the takeover times, the times when our young people come alongside us. The messages they give us are so powerful. And as part of Takeover Fortnight, we had lots of opportunities to speak to our young people with additional needs and disabilities. And their insights are just so potent. They stay with us, and we talk about them and use them every day and every week and feed that through, as well as having significant amounts of surveys and other kind of feedback opportunities. But they're not keen to join the meeting.
Councillor Essard. Sorry, before you do.
Is that better? Lovely, thank you. I'm Julia Ingram. I'm the Corporate Director for Adult Social Care Operations and one of the SROs on this piece of work. I just wanted to reinforce the importance that we place in that co-production piece of work. So specifically in the service redesign, there have been a number of workshops that have been delivered across the summer which have had very active membership from the Parent Council, and they've actually helped us to design the functions that the new service needs to deliver. And so everything we're now doing in terms of thinking about how we shape the final model is built on that co-production and their investment and time in it. Just wanted to let you be aware of that bit.
Thank you. Councillor Essard now.
Thank you. And yes, I'm following on really from what's been said, but I'm looking at 2.4, the service redesign. As you're saying, there is lots of words in this report, and I welcome the approach. And talking about communication and collaboration, it's so important to get that, that one direction from everyone, and you know, all singing from the same hymn sheet, as it were. But I see here you've got that the, you know, capturing the majority of the services that are in the scope for redesign, mapping them against an agreed set of 9 child-focused outcomes. Well, you don't say anywhere where these 9 focused outcomes are. I mean, they're obvious. Some of them are obvious, but does that mean that you know, you're all working to those 9 of child-focused outcomes, leading into adulthood, I presume? Is there any way that we could be, you know about these or what they are, or is that something that, you know, that you're just working to, that, you know, it's not that important that we know? But I'm just curious that what the actual nitty-gritty sort of list of things are, rather than, you know, you've got a lot of words in here that may, you know, that could mean anything, but when it comes down to it, it's those 9 agreed focused outcomes that are so important. Have they been, set in stone, or are they, you know, movable feast, as it were? Could we know a bit more about that, please?
So, Chair, I think the answer to that is yes. I hope you can still hear me. It's breaking up a little bit at the moment. But in terms of those 9 outcomes that you've referred to, then absolutely. I'm sure there's a short slide deck somewhere that we can share with elected members very easily.
Thank you. Councillor Rose, are you happy that's shared with us after the meeting? Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments from members? Okay. Thank you very much, Mark. We note the progress on that and appreciate the update. So thank you, and thank you everyone for their contribution. We move on to item 10, which is exempt business. There is no exempt business, so therefore at 11:03 I close the meeting. Thank you.